Okay, so picture this. It's 1893. You're in Chicago.
Right in the thick of it.
Yeah, exactly. The city is just absolutely roaring. It's the height of the Industrial Revolution. The World's Columbian Exposition is underway.
Yeah.
And the air is just thick with this Western self-assurance, right? The clanging of new machinery and that overwhelming, almost intoxicating belief that the modern material world has reached its absolute zenith.
Right, the pinnacle of human achievement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So into this massive, tumultuous clash of cultures, specifically, into a building packed with thousands of the most educated, most dogmatic, established religious figures of the Western world, walks this 30-year-old monk from India. He's wearing a bright yellow robe. He hasn't even prepared a written speech. He is essentially entirely unknown to this assembly. And yet, when it's his turn to speak, he steps up to the podium and delivers just 5 words.
Just 5.
And with those first 5 words, he brings a crowd of thousands to their feet in a deafening, unprompted standing ovation. I mean, in that single moment, he effectively introduces the Western world to a radically different way of seeing reality.
It remains one of the most cinematic and rhetorically fascinating moments in modern intellectual history.
Oh, absolutely.
Those 5 words were simply, sisters and brothers of America, but, we have to look beyond the mere vocabulary here. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the immense lived reality and the profound philosophical weight behind them that the audience felt, perhaps without even really fully articulating why at the time.
And that profound philosophical weight is exactly why we're here today. Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive specially crafted for the Simplified Summary YouTube channel.
Yeah, welcome.
We are so thrilled to have you with us as we explore ideas that genuinely have the power to shift the bedrock of how you see the world. And we have a humble ask. If you find value in this journey today, please take a moment to subscribe and share the video. It directly helps the channel bring more of these profound shortcuts to being well-informed right to your screen, and it really allows us to keep exploring these massive paradigm-shifting texts.
It's an excellent mission, and the source material we're tackling today it's perfectly suited for an audience that wants to bypass the superficial and just get straight to the philosophical core.
It really is. So here's our mission overview for today. We are diving deep into the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Volume 3 lectures from Colombo to Almora, alongside his foundational addresses from that monumental 1893 World's Parliament of Religions.
Right.
Our goal for you, the listener, is to uncover a philosophy that cuts straight through our modern anxieties. We're exploring a framework that fundamentally redefines how we view ourselves, how we interact with our daily labor. And it offers a highly practical, rigorously logical blueprint for true universal acceptance.
To set the stage properly for this analysis, though, we really have to grasp the historical and the psychological friction of these sources.
Yeah, let's get into that context.
When Vivekananda stepped onto that stage in Chicago, and later when he returned to India to deliver his intense series of lectures from Colombo to Almora, he wasn't attempting to convert the West to a new religion. That's a crucial distinction that readers often miss.
Okay.
He was actually synthesizing thousands of years of ancient Indian thought, specifically the profound non-dualistic philosophy of the Vedas and the Upanishads, into a highly logical, fiercely modern framework. He was taking these ancient insights regarding the oneness of the universe and presenting them in a language that Western science, particularly the burgeoning fields of physics and psychology, was just beginning to echo. Wow.
He stood precisely at the confluence of 2 massive rivers of human endeavor, the deeply ancient introspective East and the young, energetic, outwardly focused West.
Okay, let's unpack this Chicago shockwave. Because the speech he gives at the Parliament of Religions, it isn't just a polite diplomatic greeting to a room full of foreigners.
Not all.
He introduces a concept that completely flips the script on how different faiths or even different ideological camps interact. He speaks of a religion that doesn't just tolerate other faiths, but actively accepts them all as true. He uses this incredibly evocative phrase describing all human religious attempts as a wonderful bouquet of worship.
What's fascinating here is his rigorous, almost surgical critique of the concept of tolerance.
Yeah, because we use that word all the time.
Right. In modern discourse, we often hold up tolerance as the highest possible virtue in a diverse society. We strive for a tolerant world. But Vivekananda points out the subtle, kind of insidious arrogance hidden inside the very word.
If I say I tolerate your beliefs or your political views or your existence, the implicit subtext is unavoidably hierarchical. It's saying, I am right and you are wrong, but I am gracious and magnanimous enough to put up with you.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's fundamentally condescending. Universal acceptance, on the other hand, operates on a completely different epistemological paradigm. It acknowledges that human beings have fundamentally different tendencies, different intellectual capacities, and different psychological needs.
Right.
Therefore, they will naturally and correctly take different paths. As he quotes from an ancient hymn, just as different streams having their sources in different places all mingle their water in the sea, all these different paths lead to the same ultimate reality.
That distinction between, like, putting up with someone's ignorance and actually validating their path as structurally necessary, that is a massive leap, and you have to imagine the friction in that room.
Oh, absolutely.
He's speaking to Victorian-era theologians, many of whom firmly believed they held the exclusive, absolute monopoly on divine truth. To illustrate the absurdity of that exclusivity, he tells a brilliant story. And it's genuinely funny, which is a great rhetorical tactic when you're challenging someone's worldview.
The frog in the well.
The frog in the well, yes.
Yeah.
He asks this grand assembly of intellectuals to imagine a frog that has lived its entire life in a small well. It was born there, it grew up there, and it cleans the water of worms every day. It logically concludes that this well is the entire universe.
Makes sense from its perspective.
Right. Then one day, another frog falls into the well, a frog that lives in the sea. The well frog asks, "Where are you from?" The sea frog says, "I'm from the sea." The well frog asks, "How big is that? Is it as big as my well?" And he takes a leap from one side of the well to the other.
It's the perfect visual for human ideological narrow-mindedness, precisely because it highlights the limits of empirical observation when one's environment is artificially restricted.
Yeah. So the sea frog laughs at this tiny leap and says, "How do you compare the sea with your little well?" So the well frog takes another slightly bigger leap and asks, "Is your sea so big?" Finally, utterly unable to comprehend a body of water larger than a well, the well frog gets angry and declares, "Nothing can be bigger than my well. This fellow is a liar, so turn him out."
And out he goes.
Now, what I find so compelling here is how Vivekananda deploys this to explain sectarianism. He doesn't just attack the Christian theologians in the room, he levels the playing field. He says the Hindu sits in his little well and thinks it's the whole world. The Christian sits in his well, the Muslim in his well, all thinking their tiny conceptual enclosure is the absolute limit of existence.
The rhetorical genius of using a fable in this context cannot be overstated. I mean, if he had walked out and delivered a dense academic critique of dogmatic exclusivity, the defense mechanisms of that audience would have gone up instantly.
Oh, definitely.
By using a seemingly simple story, he bypasses their theological armor. But the philosophical point is devastating. The tragedy of the frog in the well isn't merely that he is ignorant, it is that his ignorance makes him actively hostile to anything grander than his own lived experience. When confronted with the vastness of the ocean, his immediate reaction is not curiosity, it is rejection. He brands the messenger a liar to protect the fragile borders of his well.
And I want to direct this right to you, the listener. How often do you sit in your own well? It doesn't even have to be about religion or theology. Think about your industry knowledge, your political affiliations, or your tightly curated social media feeds. How often do we dismiss the vast sea of outside perspectives simply because they don't fit into the tiny algorithmic enclosure we've spent our lives swimming in?
That's a really good point.
So incredibly easy to call the sea frog a liar, or block them, or mute them, rather than admit our well isn't the whole world.
That intellectual enclosure, that fierce protection of the well, it leads directly to the danger of exclusive groups, which Vivekananda critiques with remarkable intensity in these texts. He points out the structural hypocrisy of organizations that shout from the rooftops about universal brotherhood, but simultaneously form exclusive, tightly gate-kept sects.
Right, the exclusivity.
To drive this home, he uses another wonderfully sharp illustration. He describes two brothers in an Orthodox Indian household who want to drink wine secretly, which is considered highly taboo. Their strict uncle is sleeping in the very next room. So as they start drinking, they are hyper-aware of the danger and they keep whispering to each other, "Silence, uncle will wake up."
I can picture it.
But as the alcohol hits their bloodstream and they lose their inhibitions, their whispering turns into shouting. They are yelling at the top of their lungs, "Silence, uncle will wake up," until, inevitably, they wake the strict uncle who catches them red-handed.
That is such a vivid image of self-defeating behavior. But let's look at how he applies this to society, because it cuts deep into the sociology of religion and ideology.
He essentially diagnoses human social behavior using this metaphor. He argues that people in the world act exactly like those drunken brothers. They shout at the top of their lungs, "Universal brotherhood, we are all equal, we believe in the unity of man."
Right.
But with their very next breath, they say, "Therefore, let us make a sect. Let us draw a boundary." And the moment you draw that boundary and stipulate, to be in our brotherhood, you must believe exactly this specific doctrine or perform this exact ritual or vote for this specific candidate, you have completely destroyed the equality you just proclaimed.
Wow, yeah.
True brotherhood, he argues, does not shout. It doesn't form little exclusive clubs that conceptually and sometimes literally cut the throats of outsiders. It acts.
Huh.
The individuals who genuinely perceive universal brotherhood are the ones doing the silent, unglamorous work of loving and helping, not the ones organizing massive campaigns to declare how inclusive their exclusive club is.
This critique of exclusivity naturally forces us to re-examine the very nature of the people we are supposedly excluding. If we're supposed to have this universal acceptance, what is the fundamental nature of the human being that warrants such acceptance? Because this is where the philosophy gets incredibly deeply personal.
It really does.
And where Vivekananda introduces a paradigm shift that must have sent shockwaves through the parliament. He introduces the Vedantic concept of the soul to an audience steeped in a radically different theological tradition. He stands there and asserts, "We are not bodies that happen to possess souls. We are infinite spirits currently residing in bodies.
Right.
The body is transient, it will die, but the spirit is eternal." He references the ancient texts, noting that the sword cannot pierce it, the fire cannot burn it, the water cannot melt it. It is an infinite circle whose circumference is nowhere, but whose center is located in the body.
This represents a tectonic shift from the prevailing Western theological paradigms of his time, and it's vital we understand the friction here. In the 19th century Western view, heavily influenced by Augustinian and Calvinist theology, the core defining problem of humanity was original sin.
Yes, the inherent brokenness.
We were inherently broken, fundamentally corrupt from birth. The goal of religion, therefore, was essentially a rescue mission. It was a transactional system of salvation, how to appease or escape the wrath of a terrible, uncompromising God because of our inherent sinfulness.
That's a heavy burden.
The Eastern paradigm that Vivekananda outlines operates on a completely different philosophical axis. The goal isn't escaping wrath, it is regaining our lost selfhood. It is realizing what we actually ontologically are. He stands on that stage in Chicago and proclaims that it is a standing libel on human nature to call human beings sinners.
He just refuses.
He flatly refuses to do it. Instead, he addresses the audience with a quote from the ancient sages. "Hear, ye children of immortal bliss."
Children of immortal bliss. But wait, put yourself in the shoes of a 19th century Calvinist sitting in that audience. Your entire worldview, your societal structure, your moral framework is built on the idea that humans are wretched sinners in need of external salvation.
Right.
And this monk tells you that calling yourself a sinner is a libel on your own nature. How does that not immediately alienate the audience? How was that received? Did they see it as intellectual honesty or a dodge?
It was received as an absolute revelation by many, precisely because it relieved a crushing psychological burden. If you genuinely believe your core is fundamentally corrupt, you live your entire life in a state of constant fear, hypervigilance, and behavioral management. You are constantly policing your inherent wickedness. But if you believe your core is immortal, bliss, pure, perfect, and infinite, your spiritual journey completely transforms. It is no longer about begging for an external pardon. It is about doing the internal work to clear away the psychological and material dust to let your inherent light shine through.
That's beautiful.
He uses the metaphor of lions. He says humanity is like a pride of lions who have been hypnotized or deluded into thinking they are sheep. Religion isn't about the impossible task of magically turning a sheep into a lion. It's about waking the lion up to its own true nature. It is a process of dehypnotization.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because if I am listening to this and I'm a philosopher in that audience, I am immediately raising my hand with the ultimate theological trap.
The theodicy question.
Exactly. If we are these perfect, pure, infinite spirits, these majestic lions of immortal bliss, why are we in this messed up, imperfect state? Why are we tied down to physical matter, getting sick, feeling miserable, acting selfishly, and suffering? How can the absolutely perfect become the quasi-perfect? What caused the infinite to become bound by the finite?
It's an important question, perhaps the most important question in theology, the origin of delusion and suffering. And it is right here that Vivekananda's rigorous intellectual honesty truly shines, setting him apart from almost every other speaker at that parliament.
What does he say?
When he is asked how the perfect soul became deluded into believing it is imperfect matter, he does not invent a convoluted theological loophole. He doesn't blame it on an apple or a talking snake or a mysterious cosmic bet between God and the devil. He stands before the most learned, systematically trained theological minds of his day and says boldly and without hesitation, "I do not know."
And as a modern reader, I find that deeply compelling. But again, wasn't that frustrating for an audience that demanded systematic answers to stand there and say, I don't know? Doesn't that undermine his whole philosophical edifice?
On the contrary, it reinforces the rigorous logic of his system. He explains exactly why he doesn't know and why no human mind can know. He states that human logic is entirely bound by the laws of cause and effect. But cause and effect only exist within the realm of matter, within the realm of the finite mind.
Right.
The infinite, the absolute soul, is by definition beyond cause and effect. Therefore, to ask what caused the infinite to become finite is a structurally illogical question. It is trying to apply the rules of the matrix to the reality outside the matrix.
That makes perfect sense.
He points out that it is a fact of everybody's daily consciousness that we think of ourselves as the body, that delusion is apparent. But why or how the perfect soul got caught in this delusion is something the human intellect simply cannot grasp. To invent a mythological story to explain it is, in his view, mere sophistry. The Eastern approach he presents is incredibly pragmatic. We don't know how we got into the fire, but it is an undeniable empirical fact that we are in the fire. The goal is not to map the history of the fire, the goal is to get out. He asks us to acknowledge the hard limitation of the human intellect and focus all our energy on the practical work of realization.
To help us conceptualize how we interact with this material world, this fire, if we are actually pure spirit, he introduces this incredible metaphor of the whirlpool in his lectures. He says that the entire universe, all of matter, is continuous. There are no true empty spaces completely dividing us. Our bodies and our minds are merely little whirlpools in the ocean of matter. Just as a whirlpool in a rushing river takes in water, spins around, holds it in a specific form for a moment, and then passes it on. Our bodies take in matter, food, water, air, hold it for a while in a specific human form, and constantly pass it on. But the ocean itself is one continuous, unbroken whole.
And that concept of continuity, which, by the way, maps beautifully onto modern understandings of quantum fields and the continuous nature of space-time, explains so much about the mechanics of human interaction.
How so?
Because we're all connected in this continuous, vibrating ocean of mind and matter, we're constantly influencing each other on a level far deeper than language. He notes in his lectures that words and thoughts only contribute about 1/3 to our actual influence over others. The remaining 2/3 is our very presence, our character, our spiritual energy, the gravitational pull of our specific whirlpool.
I think we've all experienced that. You can have someone speak perfectly arranged, highly intellectual, grammatically flawless words to you, and they leave absolutely zero impact on your life. They feel hollow. And then another person can speak broken, ungrammatical sentences. But because of the immense spiritual weight, the purity and the unselfishness of their character, their mere presence completely rearranges your worldview. It's all about the energy you're carrying and transmitting through that continuous ocean.
Precisely. And if we accept this premise that we are eternal spirits operating within a continuous, unbroken ocean of matter, it naturally forces us to re-examine how we view time, history, and the origins of the universe itself. If the soul is infinite and eternal, what does that mean for the concept of creation?
This is where we get into some heavy mind-bending physics and philosophy. Because according to the sources, Vivekananda argues fiercely against the standard Western theological concept of creation. He argues that creation has no beginning and no end. The universe is not something that was made out of nothing at a specific point in time by a god who is just sitting around in an empty void waiting to create.
This is a devastatingly logical argument against the concept of creation ex nihilo, or creation out of nothing. Vivekananda explains what he calls the parallel lines of creator and creation. If you argue, as many Orthodox theologians do, that God created the universe at a specific finite point in time, you run into a massive, insurmountable philosophical wall.
The before and after.
Right. Before this moment of creation, God's creative energy would have been entirely potential. He wasn't creating, he was just existing. Then, at the moment of creation, that potential energy became kinetic. He acted. This implies, unavoidably, that God underwent a change of state. But a fundamental law of logic, and indeed of thermodynamics, is that whatever changes is a compound entity, and whatever is a compound must eventually deteriorate, dissolve, and die. Therefore, if God can change from non-creator to creator, God is subject to change, and if God changes, God must eventually die.
Which, as he points out to the theologians, is an absurd conclusion if you are positing an eternal, immutable God. So how does he resolve that paradox?
To protect the absolute immutability of God, he argues that creation itself must be without beginning and without end. It cannot be an event, it must be an eternal process. It operates in endless, vast cycles. The universe manifests out of fine matter, runs its course through evolution, eventually dissolves back into a finer, unmanifested state, and then, after a period of rest, manifests again.
Like breathing.
Exactly. It is much like the cosmic process of breathing in and breathing out. God is the ever-active, unchanging providence guiding this eternal cycle. What is truly remarkable here is how seamlessly this ancient Vedantic concept of cyclical manifestation and dissolution aligns with the principles of the conservation of energy and the cyclical theories of the cosmos that modern astrophysics continues to debate. Matter is never created or destroyed, it merely changes form.
So, if the universe is eternal, and I am an eternal spirit going through these endless cycles of manifestation and dissolution, the listener is inevitably going to ask the obvious practical question. If I've lived past lives, if I've been doing this for eternity, why don't I remember any of it?
And he addresses that.
He anticipates this skepticism perfectly. He uses the analogy of speaking a language, which I think is brilliant. Right now, as you and I are talking, we aren't actively conscious of the thousands of words in our English vocabulary. They aren't sitting right there on the surface of our minds. But the second we try to recall a specific word to express a thought, it rushes up to the surface. His memory is exactly like a vast, deep ocean, and our current everyday consciousness is just the tiny, illuminated surface of that ocean.
It is a profound psychological insight, predating much of modern depth psychology. He is pointing out that all of our past experiences are stored in the dark depths of this mental ocean. We don't have active surface-level recall of the specific biographical details of past lives because the brain, the physical instrument of surface memory, is new.
Right.
But those deep experiences manifest in our current lives in a different, more structural way, as innate tendencies, character traits, and specific talents.
Let's explore that, because it touches on the whole nature versus nurture debate. Think about your own life or observe young children. Why is one child naturally gifted at music at age 4, while another struggles to hold a tune? Why is one naturally fearless and gregarious, while another is timid and introverted, even if raised in the exact same household? Modern science might brush it off as inherited aptitude, random genetic mutation, or epigenetic traits.
And Vivekananda addresses that directly. He acknowledges heredity, but asks a deeper structural question. Science and common sense dictate that habits are formed through repetition. You don't get a habit by doing something once. So, how can a newborn soul, which supposedly has had absolutely no time to repeat any actions or form any habits in this single life, arrive in the world with such incredibly strong, highly specific habits and tendencies?
Where do they come from?
The Vedantic answer he proposes is that the repetitions that form those deeply ingrained habits occurred in past experiences and past manifestations of the soul. The physical body certainly inherits its shape and biological parameters through genetics from the parents, but the eternal soul takes birth in a specific body that perfectly matches or provides the right environment for its pre-existing accumulated tendencies.
I find that perspective incredibly empowering. It makes you look at your own strange little quirks, your unexplained fears, or your natural talents, and realize they aren't just random genetic accidents. They are the echoes of a very long, very deep journey that you've been on for a very long time.
It transforms your self-perception from being a random biological accident to being an ancient traveler.
Exactly. But here's where we have to pivot. It's one thing to sit in an armchair or on a mountaintop and ponder the fact that you are an infinite spirit traveling through eternal cycles of time. It's an entirely different thing to commute to an office on a rainy Tuesday morning, deal with a difficult boss, and pay your taxes. How do we actually use this?
The practical application.
Yes, because Vivekananda was incredibly adamant that this massive abstract philosophy must be grounded in daily practical life. He insisted that the workshop, the farmyard, the corporate office, and the study are just as holy as the monk's cell in the Himalayas. One of his most famous and powerful assertions is, "To labor is to pray."
If we connect this to the bigger picture we established earlier, this is the inevitable, logical conclusion of non-dualistic philosophy. If the many, meaning all of us, all the objects in the universe, all the tasks we perform, and the one, the ultimate infinite divine reality, are truly the exact same reality perceived through different lenses, then every single action can be a direct path to spiritual realization.
It bridges the gap.
He effectively abolishes the distinction between the sacred and the secular. Sweeping a floor, crunching numbers in a spreadsheet, writing code, or feeding your children is just as divine an activity as meditating in a temple or fasting in a cave, provided it is done with the correct internal awareness. Life itself, in all its mundane details, is religion.
But how do we maintain that awareness when the world is so demanding and stressful? To explain how to work in this frantic world without losing that infinite perspective, he uses two really vital metaphors in his lectures on karma yoga, the yoga of action. The first is the metaphor of the lotus leaf.
A classic image.
He says we should strive to live in the world like a lotus leaf, which grows in the muddy water but is never actually moistened by it. You can push a lotus leaf entirely underwater, and the moment it comes up, the water just rolls right off its surface. It remains immaculate. He says we need to keep our hands to the work, but our hearts to God. Be fully in the world, execute your duties with excellence, but do not let the sticky, selfish, ego-driven attachments of the world saturate your inner core.
It is a masterclass in non-attachment. Not detachment, which implies a cold indifference or apathy, but non-attachment, which means engaging fully without being bound by the results.
Yes, exactly. And the second metaphor illustrates what that looks like in practice. He tells the story of Yudhishthira, an exiled king, from the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata. Yudhishthira has lost his kingdom, he's been humiliated, and he's suffering terribly in the harsh forest. His wife, seeing his misery, asks him a profound question. You are the most virtuous man alive. Why, if you're so good, do you have to suffer so much misery? What is the point of being good?
A very natural question.
Yudhishthira doesn't offer a theological justification for suffering. Instead, he points to the massive peaks of the Himalayas in the distance and says, "Behold my queen, the Himalayas. How grand and beautiful they are. I love them. They do not give me anything. They do not offer me food or shelter. But my nature is to love the grand, the beautiful. Therefore, I love them."
It is perhaps the absolute pinnacle of karma yoga. Yudhishthira loves the mountains simply because they are intrinsically beautiful, not because he expects them to provide him with gold or shelter or a return on his investment. Vivekananda uses this profound literary moment to explain how we should approach our daily work, our relationships, and our love for the divine. We must do good for the sheer sake of doing good. We must love for love's absolute sake. The moment we start working with the anxious expectation of a reward, whether that reward is money, societal fame, praise from our peers, or even a good spot in heaven, we corrupt the action. We turn spirituality and morality into a transactional trade, a negotiation. I cannot trade in love, Yudhishthira says. The highest, most powerful action in the universe is the action that is entirely unselfish.
A bit navigating that is incredibly hard. Trying to be unselfish in a hyper-capitalist, highly transactional world feels almost impossible, which is why having a guide, a teacher, or a guru is so prevalent and necessary in these traditions. But Vivekananda doesn't just say, go find a guru. He sets incredibly rigorous, almost impossibly high standards for what constitutes a true spiritual teacher. It cannot be someone doing it for money, or name, or fame, or to build an empire. If there is even a shred of selfish motive, it destroys the medium through which the spiritual force is transmitted.
This is a vital and deeply practical warning, especially in today's era of self-appointed gurus, life coaches, and spiritual influencers. He states categorically that the only medium capable of transmitting true spiritual energy from one human to another is pure love.
Wow.
If a teacher lacks purity, if they have hidden selfish motives, financial greed, or a desire for power, it is actively dangerous to study under them. Because spiritual transmission, in his view, is a real, tangible phenomenon, a polluted teacher might actually transmit their own wickedness, confusion, and ego into your mind instead of goodness. You become infected by their impurities.
He also issues a stern, almost surgical warning to the student, the person seeking a teacher. He says we must be very careful not to mistake a momentary emotional blow for true spiritual thirst. He points out how often someone experiences a sudden tragedy, the death of a loved one, a sudden illness, or a massive financial failure, and in the immediate shock of their grief, they think, the world is vain, everything is dust, I must become deeply religious and renounce everything.
The reactionary impulse.
Yes. But a few days or weeks later, the emotion fades, the grief softens, and they right back to their old selfish habits, chasing the exact same worldly goals.
It is a brilliant psychological observation. True spiritual thirst is not a reactionary impulse to life's immediate pains. It is a continuous, deep, unshakable craving for realization that persists regardless of whether you are experiencing tragedy or immense success. Until that genuine, sustained thirst is there, jumping from teacher to teacher or adopting radical spiritual practices is largely performative.
That is such a necessary reality check for anyone on a self-improvement journey. Okay, so we've covered his explosive impact in the West and the core tenets of his philosophy. Now, let's pivot to examine the aftermath. It's 1897, 4 years after the Parliament. Vivekananda returns to India, traveling from Colombo in Ceylon up to Almora in the Himalayas.
A triumphant return.
And the text describes the receptions he receives. They are massive. We are talking royal, triumphant processions, streets lined with hundreds of thousands of people, princes literally unhitching the horses from his carriage to pull it themselves. He left as an unknown wandering monk, and he returns as a conquering hero. But what's fascinating is how he handles this adulation. He's incredibly quick, almost desperate, to insist that this massive applause is not for him as an individual ego. It is for the ancient principle he represents.
He uses this triumphant return and the unprecedented national mobilization it sparked to analyze and contrast what he calls the national themes of the East and the West. He observes, with acute sociological insight, that every nation or civilization has a main theme, a vital life center, a backbone around which its entire society is structured. In his travels through the West, he noted that the absolute backbone of Western civilization was political organization and commercial power. Religion was present, of course, and deeply felt by many, but structurally it was a secondary ornament. It was often subordinated to national policy, utilized for social utility, or kept strictly in the private sphere. But in India, he argued, the absolute bedrock, the vital life center of the entire race, was religion and spirituality. He noted that if you touch an Indian on issues of politics or commerce, they might be entirely apathetic. But if you touch them on the nerve of spirituality, the whole nation vibrates instantly.
He gives a really striking example of this observation in action. When he landed in Ceylon, he realized that the poor, completely uneducated peasants working in the fields knew absolutely nothing about the massive European political upheavals of the time. They didn't know about the rise of socialism or the fall of ministries or the latest technological advancements. But these incredibly poor laborers all knew, down to the last man, that a monk had gone across the ocean to America and successfully represented their ancient religion at a parliament.
That's remarkable.
That abstract theological news had penetrated the very bottom rung of society. He uses this to argue that people only absorb what aligns with their national vitality.
And this observation leads directly to his grand blueprint for the future, which was a deeply pragmatic mission for both India and the world at large. He recognized that neither hemisphere had the complete picture. He believed a massive global exchange was absolutely necessary for human progress. India desperately needed to exchange its vast, accumulated spiritual treasures for the West's material, scientific, and organizational knowledge in order to lift its masses out of crushing systemic poverty. The West had mastered the physical world. India had mapped the inner world.
But, and he emphasizes this with apocalyptic urgency to his countrymen, Indians must never, ever give up their spiritual backbone in the process of this exchange. He warned that if India threw away its inherent spirituality merely to copy Western materialistic civilization, to chase after pure commercial power, it would lose its reason for existing and would go extinct as a race within 3 generations. The foundation of the national edifice would be fundamentally undermined.
It is the ultimate argument against mindless assimilation. He is essentially saying you can and should learn the mechanics of modern industry from the West, but you must apply them through the lens of your own spiritual ethos. Do not lose your soul to gain the world.
And this is where I want to turn it back to you, the listener, because this is intensely applicable on an individual level. Think about your own life, your career, your identity. What is your personal backbone? What is the core theme, that vital center that makes you, you? We live in a world driven heavily by social media and relentless comparison that constantly pressures us to adopt someone else's definition of success. But if you try to adopt someone else's core vitality, if you try to become a ruthless entrepreneur when your true nature is to be a quiet creator or vice versa, and abandon your own center, you risk losing yourself entirely.
It's a real danger.
Vivekananda said it so beautifully. Learn everything that is good from others, but bring it in, and in your own way absorb it. Do not become others.
Do not become others. It is a powerful mandate for radical authenticity. He uses the metaphor of a river. A river must flow in its own channel. You can clear the channel of debris, you can remove the blocks, you can make it run faster, but you cannot force a river to flow backward up the mountain. You must grow according to your own intrinsic nature. You can assimilate nutrients from the soil, the air, and the water, but a seed of a mighty oak cannot decide to grow into a pine tree simply because the pine is currently more fashionable.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at the massive scope of everything we've covered from this deep dive into Vivekananda's works, we are fundamentally not miserable sinners defined by our worst mistakes or our inherent flaws. We are children of immortal bliss, pure, perfect, and infinite spirits currently navigating the complex whirlpools of a material world. We've learned that true religion is not about adhering to a rigid set of exclusionary dogmas or defending a tiny well. It is about actual experiential realization, the hard work of waking the lion up inside of you.
Well said.
We've seen that our daily work, no matter how mundane or repetitive, is our highest worship if we execute it with the unselfish detachment of a lotus leaf. And we've explored the mind-bending concept that the universe is an infinite, eternal cycle where every single one of us is intricately, physically, and spiritually connected in a continuous ocean of matter and mind.
It is a breathtakingly comprehensive system. And to fulfill our promise to leave you with the final provocative thought, something to really chew on as you navigate the modern world. Throughout his lectures, Vivekananda issues a deeply challenging call to action that I think is more relevant now than ever.
What is it?
He asks his audience, if you cannot worship your brother man, the manifested God, how can you worship a God who is unmanifested? It is entirely easy, and frankly quite safe, to love a conceptual God in the sky. It is easy to love humanity in the abstract. But what about the reality of the people right in front of us? If we applied his philosophy of universal acceptance and inherent divinity to our modern, hyper-polarized digital culture, it demands a radical shift.
Yeah, that's not easy.
It challenges us to look beyond the curated avatars and the outrage-driven comment sections. It asks us to view the poor, the miserable, the diseased, and yes, even the incredibly difficult, frustrating, politically opposed individuals in our daily lives, not as burdens, not as enemies, and not as obstacles to our peace. Instead, he challenges us to view them as the Lord himself, appearing in those specific, sometimes abrasive forms for the express purpose of granting us the supreme, ego-destroying privilege of serving them.
Wow. Think about how that reframes your next difficult interaction. Changing your view of a deeply frustrating person from an obstacle to a privilege to serve the divine, that isn't just a nice thought. That is a psychological tool that can dismantle your ego and change your life immediately.
It really is.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. You've been listening to a deep dive specially crafted for the Simplified Summer YouTube channel. Thank you so much for giving us your time, your focus, and your attention today. Remember to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed this journey, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Keep diving deep into the texts that challenge you. And whatever you do this week, don't forget to question the walls of your own well. Take care.